The year is 1979, and Hollywood, well, it was still very much riding the high of these sweeping spice operas.
Right. Audiences were getting these bright, optimistic, swashbuckling adventures among the stars.
But then a film arrived that sort of dragged science fiction into the grime and the oil and really the deepest, darkest corners of human anxiety.
And we are, of course, talking about Ridley Scott's masterpiece of terror, Alien.
It's so much more than just a successful movie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was enormously successful. It grossed up to about $188 million worldwide, which, for a horror-tinged sci-fi film back then, was just huge money.
But what's so fascinating looking back is that the initial reception was, well, it was surprisingly mixed.
It really was.
Yeah.
Some critics just didn't seem to know how to process it. This strange, beautiful, and, frankly, gruesome creation.
And that gap, that space between the immediate reviews and its current unquestioned status as this foundational pillar of cinema history.
That's exactly what makes its story so rich.
That's precisely what we're here to explore today. We're not going to just walk through the plot of the commercial starship Nostromo fighting for their lives.
No, you know that story intimately.
Our focus today is really on the engine that drove that terror. We want to look at the profound historical context of its creation,
The unique casting and production history.
the revolutionary biomechanical design of the creature, and of course, the massive cultural influence that redefined how the science fiction and horror genres could actually work together.
And just to lay the groundwork, it's probably important to identify the core creative team.
Yes, definitely.
So, the story originated with Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, with O'Bannon writing the final screenplay. It was produced by Brandywine Productions, distributed by 20th Century Fox.
And it was a dual UK and US production, right?
It was, and that's a key point. It meant they could pull from these different pools of technical skill and acting talent, which, ultimately shaped the unique, gritty texture we see on screen.
So let's start where the audience begins, with the crew of the Nostromo, because they are not the polished militaristic heroes or, eager explorers we'd grown accustomed to.
Not at all. And director Ridley Scott had a very, very specific vision for them.
Which was what, exactly?
Realism. That was his absolute priority. He believed that if he hired strong, convincing actors who could just inhabit their roles believably.
He could then focus on the other stuff?
Exactly. He could dedicate his primary focus to developing the radical visual style and that suspenseful, claustrophobic atmosphere of the ship. He needed the cast to sell the reality of the situation.
So the audience would feel trapped right alongside them?
Precisely.
And how did he go about achieving that?
Well, the casting was a global effort. They used Mary Solway in the UK and Mary Goldberg in the US. And Scott's driving concept, which is now famous, was to make the crew look like working astronauts in a realistic environment.
He summed it up as truckers in space.
That's the phrase. He wanted them to feel like blue-collar workers, people punching a time clock, hauling cargo across the galaxy, not dashing adventurers.
And that concept, that whole idea of truckers in space, was actually a pretty profound commentary on the genre itself, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. It was a reaction against the pristine, overly sleek, and frankly often sterile futures that were presented in earlier sci-fi films like 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Right, where everything's perfect and clean.
Exactly. Now, Star Wars had sort of cracked open the door for that used future aesthetic, showing ships that were battered and old.
And Alien just blew that door off its hinges.
It took that concept and plunged it into the industrial abyss. Scott wanted grime. He wanted sweat and people who looked genuinely tired of their jobs.
And the casting really reflects that. I mean, these actors were not the usual young, beautiful ensemble you'd find in a thriller.
No, and that was so deliberate. The age of the ensemble was a huge contributing factor to that texture of experience and cynicism.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think about it. Tom Skerritt, who played Captain Dallas, he was 46. Ian Holm, the science officer, was 48.
And Harry Dean Stanton was even older?
He was 53. And Yaphet Kotto was 42. These were veteran actors, and they brought decades of life experience to roles that emphasized duty and boredom and exhaustion.
Not youthful enthusiasm.
Not at all. That age choice provided this instant sense of realism and made their mundane work life feel so authentic, before the alien even showed up to shatter it.
Which brings us to Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley, the character who would come to anchor this entire saga.
And the genesis of her role is particularly telling, especially given how important she became to the film's thematic legacy.
It's a classic example of an idea that just evolved beautifully over time.
It really is. When O'Bannon and Shusett first wrote the script, they included this deliberate note stating, "The crew is unisex, and all parts are interchangeable for men or women."
Which, from a production standpoint, is a stroke of genius. It gives the director maximum flexibility.
Absolutely.
But Ripley was originally envisioned as a man, correct?
She was. Scott was initially leaning toward a male lead. But then executive Alan Ladd Jr. made the pivotal suggestion. He just asked, why can't Ripley be a woman?
And that one question changed everything.
It fundamentally changed everything, not just the character, but the power dynamic, the survival narrative, and all the thematic interpretations we still discuss today. Suddenly, the horror of bodily violation and survival just gained a far richer context.
And the person chosen to bring her to life was a relative newcomer, Sigourney Weaver.
Weaver's casting was a true breakthrough. And, surprisingly, she was the very last actor brought on board.
She was from theater, right?
A strong background in Broadway theater,
Yep.
yes, but relatively unknown in feature films. She showed such conviction and strength in her screen tests that she immediately impressed Scott and the producers.
I heard she did some of those auditions while they were building the sets around her.
That's right. She was doing these crucial auditions while the massive sets of the Nostromo were actively being built. Her performance just resonated immediately, and it earned her nominations for a Saturn Award and a BAFTA for Most Promising Newcomer.
It's incredible to think that such a seminal role was almost played by two other major talents.
Yeah, Meryl Streep and Helen Mirren both auditioned. It gives you a fascinating alternative cinematic timeline to consider.
But it's hard to imagine anyone but Weaver.
Ultimately, Weaver's unique blend of vulnerability and resilience just made Ripley an unforgettable figure.
Let's talk about some of the other members of this ensemble, because their interactions with Scott during casting reveal a lot about his methodology.
Okay.
Take Harry Dean Stanton, who played the engineering technician, Brett.
Stanton was notoriously direct.
Huh?
When he first met with Scott, his initial reaction was, I don't like sci-fi or monster movies.
That's a rough start for being cast in one of the most famous monster movies ever made.
You'd think so.
Hmm.
But Scott's brilliance was in convincing him to just ignore the sci-fi label entirely. He pitched Alien not as genre fare, but as a suspenseful, claustrophobic thriller.
Like a mystery.
Almost like a variation on Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians, where characters are picked off one by one. This approach focused Stanton on the emotional reality of being trapped, not on the spectacle of the monster.
That's a great insight into how Scott managed the tone. He treated it like a stage play where the stakes were simply life or death.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Veronica Cartwright, who played the navigator, Lambert. Her performance really sells the sheer terror of the situation.
Cartwright already had some serious horror bona fides. She'd been in classics like The Birds and Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
But she thought she was auditioning for Ripley.
That's the interesting part. She originally auditioned for Ripley and only found out she was cast as Lambert when she arrived in London for wardrobe fittings.
That must have been a shock.
It was. And she admitted later that she really struggled with Lambert. She found the character's emotional weakness and inability to cope really unsettling.
So how did the filmmakers reconcile that for her?
They convinced her that her job was to represent the audience. Lambert embodies that pure, visceral fear that the audience feels, the paralysis and the hysteria we might experience when faced with an existential threat.
She becomes a mirror.
A mirror reflecting the audience's dread, exactly. And that ability to channel that fear paid off. It earned her a Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actress.
And finally, we have to talk about the man who provides the film's most defining moment of crisis. John Hurt as Kane.
John Hurt was Scott's initial absolute first choice for the role.
But he wasn't available at first.
Right. He was committed to a separate film project in South Africa, so they cast John Finch instead. But that early production was just fraught with these rapid changes. On the very first day of shooting, Finch became seriously ill.
What happened?
He had severe bronchitis, which was compounded by previously undiagnosed diabetes. He had to be rushed to the hospital.
So they were left with a massive hole in the middle of a complex shoot.
A huge hole. But, serendipity intervened. Hurt's previous commitment had just collapsed, making him available in London.
So they got their first choice back after all.
They rushed him onto the set to replace Finch, essentially saving the production at a critical moment.
Yeah.
And his performance, especially in that famous scene, was so essential that it earned him a BAFTA nomination. The fact that the production could pivot so quickly says a lot about the chaotic yet focused environment they were working in.
Having established the realism of that cast, let's turn to the genesis of the terror they faced. The foundation of this nightmare actually began with a comedic failure, didn't it?
It did. Screenwriter Dan O'Bannon's earlier work on the satirical sci-fi comedy Dark Star in the early 1970s.
And what was the connection?
Well, Dark Star had this very low-budget, highly comedic alien. It was essentially an inflatable beach ball with claws, and O'Bannon was left deeply dissatisfied with the visual effect. He came away with this driving ambition to create a sci-fi monster that looked completely and convincingly real and terrifying.
So he started writing a script focused on that.
Exactly. A script focused purely on claustrophobic horror, initially calling it Memory.
And Memory contained the bones of the opening we know so well.
It did. It featured the crew waking from hypersleep, receiving a strange, automated signal, and being forced to land on a dangerous planetoid. The core elements of isolation and that corporate mandate were already there.
The story really gained its horrifying originality when he teamed up with Ronald Shusett. And their working title, which focused on the monster, was briefly Starbeast.
Which O'Bannon quickly rejected. He thought it sounded too generic. So he moved to the single, chilling word, alien.
And it works perfectly.
It does, because it functions as both a noun, the physical creature, and an adjective, describing that feeling of being utterly out of place and isolated. It's simple, elegant, and instantly unsettling.
But the pivotal conceptual moment, the one that guarantees the film's lasting notoriety, that came from Shusett.
Yes, the sheer mechanical horror of the life cycle.
Yeah.
Shusett realized the alien couldn't just sneak onto the ship. That was too passive.
So he came up with a much more invasive idea.
He woke up in the middle of the night with this horrific idea of the creature boarding the ship by implanting an embryo inside a crew member.
That would then violently erupt from the body.
Right. He famously framed the concept to O'Bannon as the creature, screwing one of them and planting its seed. O'Bannon recognized immediately that this element of violation and violent birth was the missing piece.
It gave him the entire movie.
It really did. It transformed a standard monster chase into something uniquely grotesque.
And despite the originality of that birth sequence, O'Bannon was famously honest about the fact that he was really just synthesizing classic genre elements.
Oh, he was a true student of genre, and he didn't pretend otherwise. He famously said, "I didn't steal Alien from anybody, I stole it from everybody."
And his greatest strength was weaving those disparate horror tropes into a seamless, cohesive narrative.
Absolutely.
Can you walk us through some of his confessed sources of inspiration?
Certainly. He cited Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World for that sense of claustrophobic, closed quarters pursuit.
The fear of a relentless monster in an environment you can't escape.
Exactly. He drew on Forbidden Planet for the setup. The crew receives a warning not to land, they defy the warning, and then they suffer the consequences.
And the image of the space jockey.
He took the specific visual of discovering a giant, fossilized alien skeleton inside a derelict craft directly from a 1965 Italian sci-fi horror film called Planet of the Vampires.
And what about the unique body horror element? Where did that come from?
That came from the gruesome horror titles of EC Comics, which specialized in grotesque fate and ironic justice. Those comics often featured monsters eating their way out of people or other shocking internal horrors.
Which defines the visceral nature of the chestburster.
And it's also worth noting the acid for blood wasn't even O'Bannon's idea initially.
Oh, really?
It was introduced by concept artist Ron Cobb. It was a brilliant narrative device to prevent the crew from simply shooting the alien. It forced them to rely on suspense and cleverness, rather than just conventional firepower.
So, the project gained traction at a perfect time for 20th Century Fox.
The timing was everything. Fox was skeptical about sci-fi until Star Wars became this unprecedented phenomenon in 1977.
And suddenly the genre was red hot.
It was, and as O'Bannon noted, the only serious spaceship script they had ready was Alien. So it was fast-tracked.
And they pitched it as Jaws in space.
An instantly accessible elevator pitch. It worked.
The initial budget was fairly modest, around $4.2 million. But the script was heavily revised by producers David Giller and Walter Hill, which led to some friction with O'Bannon.
It did. Gidler and Hill ended up performing 8 drafts of revisions. Their primary focus was on making the dialogue sound more natural, fitting that truckers in space concept.
But their most crucial contribution was the introduction of the android subplot.
That's right. They added the character of Ash, the android science officer played by Ian Holm, along with a chilling corporate directive to prioritize the creature over the crew.
And O'Bannon didn't initially like that twist, so why was it so important in the end?
Well, Shusett later said adding Ash was one of the best things in the movie. And he was right. The android twist dramatically heightened the stakes by introducing a layer of human, or more accurately, corporate betrayal.
It transforms the movie.
It does. It goes from a simple creature feature into a cautionary tale about how cold-blooded capitalistic mandates can supersede human life. The horror wasn't just external anymore, it was also internal, built into the very structure of the crew's environment.
And the final commitment, the green light, came when Ridley Scott got involved, and he doubled the budget.
He secured that financial commitment by presenting Fox with these detailed cinematic storyboards that showed exactly what his vision entailed. He drew heavily on the visual language of serious science fiction like 2001.
But he emphasized one core element.
Pure, unadulterated horror. He wasn't aiming for adventure. He described the film to the studio as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of science fiction. And that mandate set the stage for the dark, claustrophobic, and visceral aesthetic that defined the whole production.
That emphasis on visceral terror leads us, I think, inevitably to the creature itself, the xenomorph. The entire impact of the film rests on the radical, unforgettable design provided by the Swiss surrealist artist H.R. Giger.
And O'Bannon deserves the credit for that introduction. He's the one who showed Scott the work of Giger, particularly the painting Necronomicon.
And Scott's reaction was immediate.
It was profound. He found the work both disturbing and intensely beautiful. He instantly recognized that this biomechanical fusion of machine and biology was the exact aesthetic they needed for their antagonist.
But Fox initially found Giger's concepts too grotesque, didn't they?
They did. But they understood that to truly frighten the audience and avoid the pitfalls of a cheap B-movie monster, the creature had to look completely original.
And crucially, it had to seem like it was part of its environment, not just a man in a rubber suit.
Exactly. So Giger was given the monumental task of designing all 4 stages of the alien's life cycle: the egg, the facehugger, the chest burster, and the adult xenomorph, as well as the environment of the derelict spacecraft.
Let's focus on the adult xenomorph for a moment. Scott made a very deliberate choice in how it was filmed. He recognized that sometimes less is truly more terrifying.
Absolutely. Scott understood that the monster movie cliché is to show the creature fully, which renders it familiar and less frightening.
So instead, he chose to keep the xenomorph almost constantly in shadow.
Right. Relying on quick glimpses, its grace, its slow, deliberate movements, and just general ambiguity to heighten the terror. His core principle was that the fear came not from what you see, but the effect of what you think you saw.
Forcing the audience to project their own fears onto it.
He did. He forced the audience to project their most primal fears onto that fleeting image.
And the physical construction of the creature was a masterpiece of specialized engineering, designed specifically to achieve that unnatural look.
It really was. They needed someone physically unique to wear the latex suit. They found Balaji Badeo, a Nigerian design student who was 6'10" and incredibly slender.
And he was cast specifically for his frame.
His height and thinness were essential to creating the illusion that the creature's limbs were too long, that the body contained nothing human inside.
And to further emphasize that alien movement, Badeo took Tai Chi and mime classes.
He did, to achieve those slow, controlled, utterly unnatural movements.
And the complexity of the headpiece is legendary.
The head was manufactured separately by the Italian designer Carlo Rambaldi, who had previously worked on the creatures in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
While Giger sculpted the body.
Yes, incorporating details like actual snake vertebrae and even cooling tubes scavenged from a Rolls-Royce to emphasize that fusion of bone and machine.
But Rambaldi's final head was staggeringly complex.
It was built with approximately 900 individual moving parts dedicated to animating the jaw, the transparent dome, and of course the infamous interpharyngeal jaw.
That second mouth that bursts out.
That's the one. And this commitment to complex mechanics was essential to avoiding that B-movie trap. It ensured that the audience believed in the creature's physicality.
Making its movements and attacks feel frighteningly real, not cheap.
Right. And to complete that repulsive, wet look, they used copious amounts of KY jelly on the creature's outer skin and mouth to simulate saliva and give it that necessary slimy, repulsive appearance.
Now we have to discuss the scene that burned this film into the collective consciousness, the chestburster sequence. And it's important to pause and acknowledge the sympathetic horror inflicted upon John Hurt's character, Kane, who was the unwitting vessel for this monstrous life.
It remains, I think, perhaps the single most shocking moment in cinema history. And its success stemmed entirely from the technical execution and the actors' genuinely terrified reactions.
How did they achieve it?
It was a sophisticated setup. They placed an artificial torso over the table, with John Hurt's head and arms emerging from below. This artificial body was then filled with this truly repulsive cocktail of practical effects.
Cow stomach, tripe.
And various viscera, all hooked up to high-pressure pumps designed to spray the blood and guts explosively.
And the crucial element, the piece of cinematic brilliance that guarantees the realism, was the element of surprise for the cast.
It was an act of controlled psychological terror on the set. The cast members knew the creature would emerge, but they were explicitly not warned about the sheer explosive torrent of blood and viscera that would accompany it.
It was all shot in a single chaotic take.
It was. When the creature burst through, a geyser of fake blood shot directly at Veronica Cartwright, shocking her so completely that she fell over backwards and went into genuine hysterics.
That must have been terrifying for everyone involved.
Oh, absolutely. As Tom Skerritt later recounted, what you saw on camera was the real response. That raw, authentic shock from the cast provides the scene with an intensity that no amount of acting could ever replicate.
It resulted in test audiences reacting violently.
Many reportedly moved to the back of the theater during screenings, actively trying to distance themselves from the screen to escape the visceral shock.
That element of surprise and realism was Scott's core aesthetic. But the terror didn't just come from the creature. It came from the industrial environment they were trapped in.
Right, the massive, grubby Nostromo.
Which was deliberately constructed to feel like a retrofitted old technology.
Emphasizing a used industrial look. It was meant to feel like a gigantic, beat-up World War II submarine or a floating metallic Gothic castle.
Massive, standardized, and machine-filled.
And that aesthetic sharply contrasted with the gleaming technology audiences were used to seeing.
And the illusion of this massive, functional machine was heavily aided by concept artist Ron Cobb.
Cobb was instrumental in adding that layer of gritty, functional realism. He created the semiotic standard, a consistent system of industrial-style symbols, safety signs, and color-coded labels that appeared throughout the ship.
Which emphasized that the Nostromo was a standardized, multilingual, multi-crew environment.
Exactly, where even the warning labels were official and oppressive.
And we get the first glimpse of the sinister organization behind the disaster, thanks to Cobb, even though it's mostly just referred to as the company in the dialogue.
That's right. Cobb coined the name Weyland-Yutani, which appears on various props, like the beer cans and computer screens.
And he derived it as an implied business alliance.
Between Britain, based on British Leyland, which he shortened to Weyland in Japan, after his neighbor named Yutani. It was this quiet piece of world building that suggested a global corporate reach extending into the galaxy.
So while the Nostromo was industrial and cold, Geiger's sets were the organic, almost sexualized antithesis.
And this contrast is crucial to the film's themes. Geiger sculpted the interior of the derelict spacecraft in the egg chamber, using this strange mixture of dried bones and plaster, creating that distinct biomechanical aesthetic.
Veronica Cartwright observed that Geiger's sets were so erotic.
She did. She described them as a collection of shapes resembling big vaginas and penises. She noted the experience was visceral, like you're going inside of some sort of womb or whatever.
Yeah.
This deliberate sexual and organic imagery created a terrifying counterpoint to the sterile, industrialized human setting.
And the single biggest design statement was the space jockey, the fossilized giant alien creature discovered at the controls.
That was the defining piece of set design that announced this film was serious science fiction and horror. The studio initially balked at the cost of such an expensive, massive piece of scenery used for only one scene.
But the production team insisted it was essential.
They did. They argue that the audience needed to comprehend the epic, alien scope of this discovery to prevent the film from seeming like a cheap monster movie. Yeager airbrushed the entire set and the colossal space jockey by hand to achieve its unique, textured look.
And I understand the production team had to be extremely resourceful to make these vast sets work on a limited budget.
They absolutely did. For the space jockey set, due to budget constraints, they only constructed one massive wall.
Just one.
Just one. The jockey itself sat on a rotating disc, allowing them to film it from multiple angles to create the illusion of a complete immense chamber.
That's incredible.
And another fascinating anecdote about their resourcefulness involves the lighting in the egg chamber, that eerie, unique lighting.
Yeah.
The production borrowed high-powered lasers from the English rock band The Who. They just happened to be testing their stage show next door. They used that specialized rock and roll lighting equipment to create the mysterious beams that illuminated the alien eggs.
Thinking about how pervasive Alien is in popular culture today, it's genuinely difficult to grasp that it received a mixed reception initially.
It's a classic case of a film being ahead of its time. Some genre critics praised it, recognizing its atmospheric strength, but others were just resistant to its blending of high sci-fi production values with raw gothic horror.
Do you have any examples?
Sure, Time Out dismissed it as an empty bag of tricks. Even Gene Siskel, a prominent critic, categorized it essentially as haunted house film set in a spaceship.
He conceded it was scary, though.
He did, but he felt the final form of the alien was somehow less scary than its earlier, more ambiguous forms.
So it really took years for the critical consensus to catch up to the film's true originality.
It did, and the shift has been dramatic and universal. Over the decades, Alien has been widely reassessed, moving firmly into the canon as one of the greatest and most influential science fiction and horror films ever made. It's now studied as a masterpiece of suspense and design.
And the ultimate example of this shift is arguably Roger Ebert.
Ebert's evolving view really encapsulates the film's journey. Initially, he gave the film somewhat mixed praise. He noted its success as a thriller, but questioned its deeper meaning.
But he came around to it.
He did. He later included it on his esteemed great movies list. And in that reassessment, he praised its slow, deliberate, suspenseful pacing, its overwhelming atmosphere, and the inspired sense of dread built into the scene of exploring the alien planet.
He recognized it was about atmosphere and suggestion as much as it was about action.
Precisely.
The film's formal recognition and awards really cement its transformation from a successful genre picture into a major cultural artifact.
It secured a major high-profile win early on, receiving the 1980 Academy Award for Best Visual Effects.
And that award was shared among all the key contributors.
Yes, including H.R. Geiger, Carlo Rambaldi, Brian Johnson, Mick Alder, and Dennis Ayling. It was a significant achievement for a horror film.
It was also massively successful at genre-specific awards.
It won the Saturn Award for Best Science Fiction Film, Best Direction for Ridley Scott, and Best Supporting Actress for Veronica Cartwright. It also took home the prestigious Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation.
And its historical importance was eventually acknowledged by the United States government, placing it in the same category as other true cinematic treasures.
That's right. In 2002, the Library of Congress recognized its enduring cultural significance, selecting it for preservation in the United States National Film Registry.
Deeming it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
And on top of that, in 2008, the American Film Institute ranked it the 7th best film in the science fiction genre. The fact that it consistently appears on these major institutional best-of lists shows that its legacy is not just enduring, but actively studied and celebrated.
So now we get to the analysis of why this film endures. Beyond the technical brilliance and the suspense, the film is intensely rich with thematic and psychoanalytic analysis.
Especially regarding bodily violation and sexual overtones, yes.
The film is often cited when discussing the concept of objection.
That's a critical theory put forth by Julia Kristeva. And simply put, objection refers to the psychological breakdown of conventional borders, what is considered the self and what is the repulsive, excluded other.
And the profound horror of Alien comes from its intentional dismantling of the sanctity of the human form.
Involving bodily invasion, grotesque inner life, and the confrontation with mortality.
And that idea of objection is made explicit through the highly charged sexual imagery embedded in the creature's design and its life cycle.
It is undeniable. The creature's terrifying appearance, the phallic shape of its head and its movement, has been exhaustively discussed by critics.
They noted the aggressive visual language,
including the open, dripping vaginal mouth and the way the entire life cycle functions as a violation. Feminist critics, notably Barbara Creed, analyzed the faithhugger's attack on Cain as a form of non-consensual male rape.
And the chestburster as a violent masculine birth.
Creed framed the creature as representing the monstrous feminine, an embodiment of cultural fears surrounding sexuality and reproduction when they're divorced from normative structures.
And what's crucial is that this was not merely subtext derived by academics. Screenwriter Dan O'Bannon explicitly admitted the sexual imagery was intentional.
He saw it as a calculated act of audience manipulation. He stated that his goal was to create a metaphorical payback for previous horror films where sexually vulnerable women were frequently the targets of male monsters.
So by making the men the victims of penetration and biological violation?
He was aiming to put in every image he could think of to make the male audience cross their legs. The concept of the creature planting its seed down the throat was designed to maximize that discomfort and fear of violation.
But there's an equally compelling alternative viewpoint that shifts the focus away from gender and sexuality and onto cold political theory.
Specifically what is termed machinic modernism.
And how does that work?
Well, this interpretation looks at Geiger's design and the creature's efficiency not as a critique of gender, but as an expression of anti-humanist ideals. This view frames the xenomorph as embodying characteristics like armored aggression, dominance, and cold, ruthless efficiency.
Reflecting a harsh, almost proto-authoritarian aesthetic.
Exactly. Geiger's biomechanoids are seen as part of an artistic tradition that celebrates hard, non-human, machine-like forms in response to the perceived weakness and failures of liberal humanism.
And how does that connect back to the plot?
Under this reading, the xenomorph's role is almost functional: to eliminate the flawed, squabbling, and ultimately incompetent crew of the Nostromo. It acts as a vanishing mediator that clears the slate for the emergence of Ripley.
So Ripley survives not because of her feminine sensitivity,
But because she transforms into a decisive, authoritarian figure who jettisons moral concerns like attempting to save the cat in favor of singular, decisive action and dominance. It shifts the primary horror from sexual violation to corporate and mechanical indifference to human life.
regardless of the interpretation, the film became an immediate and pervasive blueprint for terror. It established an entirely new subgenre.
It successfully blended Gothic horror elements, the dark old ship, the confined spaces, with harrowing science fiction, serving as a direct prototype for the slasher film genre.
And its success led to a flood of immediate imitators.
A huge wave of them, all trying to cash in on the title. For instance, the 1980 film Contamination was originally going to be titled Alien 2 until Fox's lawyers quickly intervened,
And then there were films like Inseminoid and Forbidden World.
all looking to capture that specific claustrophobic, bodily invading horror.
The film's influence extends far beyond the realm of serious horror and sci-fi, though.
Absolutely. Mel Brooks created one of cinema's most famous parodies of the chestburster scene in his film Spaceballs.
And that hilariously featured John Hurt making a cameo appearance, moaning, "Oh no, not again."
It showed how quickly the scene became an iconic cultural touchstone,
And in the world of gaming, the influence is arguably even more profound.
notably on Nintendo's seminal Metroid series. As a specific and permanent homage, the villains in the first Metroid installment were explicitly named Ridley and Mother Brain after the film's director and the ship computer.
And the reverence for the original cast and story continued into modern media.
It did. The 2014 video game Alien. Isolation was remarkable because it was a direct continuation of the film's atmosphere, focusing on Ripley's daughter.
But most notably, the game's downloadable content packs managed to reunite 5 of the original Nostromo cast members.
Weaver, Scarrett, Cartwright, Stanton, and Cotto all came back to voice their characters in scenarios depicting alternate versions of key film events. That commitment to the original voices shows the continuing reverence for that specific ensemble.
And we can't overlook how this film launched a true cinematic dynasty, all centered around Sigourney Weaver and Ripley.
Weaver's success cemented her character as the thematic and narrative core of this series, leading to 3 direct sequels: Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection.
And beyond that core narrative, the universe just exploded.
Into prequels like Prometheus and Alien, Covenant, crossover films like Alien vs. Predator, and new iterations like the standalone film Alien, Romulus, and the television prequel Alien, Earth. The character Ripley became synonymous with female strength and genre survival.
Before we conclude, there's one heartwarming story that perfectly highlights the film's status as a cultural phenomenon that transcends just Hollywood budgets.
That would be the story of the 2019 stage adaptation by students at North Bergen High School in New Jersey.
Right.
These students decided to put on a stage play version of Alien, but with essentially no budget.
Yeah.
They created these elaborate, professional-looking sets and props entirely from recycled materials, salvaged junk, and toys.
And their sheer creativity and dedication went viral.
It garnered national attention. And the recognition went right to the top, didn't it?
It did. Ridley Scott himself wrote this deeply congratulatory letter praising their creativity, imagination, and determination,
He was so impressed that he donated funds for an encore performance.
which Sigourney Weaver attended.
She did, Weaver joined the cast and crew on stage afterward, personally congratulating them. That story of high school students successfully translating this expensive, terrifying spectacle into a lo-fi, resourceful piece of theater. It just perfectly encapsulates the enduring democratic power of this film's core design and story.
That is a wonderful final image to hold on to. When we look back at Alien, its enduring success isn't an accident at all.
No.
It's the result of those careful design choices, the insistence on the gritty realism of its truckers and space cast, and the intentional use of primal biological fears embedded in that biomechanical creature design. It truly set a new, darker blueprint for terror in space.
The film proved that the greatest source of horror isn't necessarily the vastness of space or even the physical monster, but the violation of the human body and the chilling, cold nature of corporate mandates.
Epitomized by Ash's directive to prioritize the creature over the crew's survival.
So when you consider Alien's enduring horror today, what aspect is truly most unsettling? The primal, violating nature of the xenomorph itself and its life cycle, or the cold, calculated ruthlessness of the company that created the problem and views human life as disposable inventory?
That's a profound thought, considering the ruthlessness of corporate culture continues to shape our modern world.
Thanks for listening.